Hello and welcome. I'm Christine Perret, Chair for today's IEEE-hosted virtual meeting of the AR community. Thank you for joining us for today's session. You'll be getting up to speed on the topic of AR-specific terminologies and glossaries. Today's session is the third of our AR community virtual meetings hosted by the IEEE to offer everyone an opportunity to attend a community meeting without travel and to contribute to the future of open and interoperable AR projects. The seeds of this session were planted back in 2010 when the Community to Reduce Barriers on Open and Interoperable Augmented Reality began working on a glossary of terms for standards development organizations to use. In the past few months, there has been renewed interest, and we thought that this would be a great time to bring in the members of the community to discuss what's next. There'll be short presentations by 3 experts who will introduce themselves, and then we'll be able to take some questions and discuss how to proceed on one or more projects. Before I get started with the presentations, and I want to make sure everyone knows the options available for joining and that we are recording this session. If you've joined today's meeting listening through your computer speaker system, that means that you're able to hear the presentation without dialing in. If you'd like to dial in using your telephone, just locate your audio pane and select Use Telephone. The number and access code for today's session will then appear. You have the ability to ask questions. To ask a question, simply type it to me, Christine, and click Send. After the presentations, we'll get to as many of your questions as possible. So let's go ahead and get started. Ben?
Yep,
all yours.
Hi. Thanks. Okay, just to introduce myself first, I'm Ben Butchart. I work for ADENA, which is part of the University of Edinburgh. And as an organization, we aim to facilitate and promote the use of technology in higher education, further education and skills. I kind of got involved with augmented reality, I guess 5 years ago, when I was asked to write a horizon scanning scoping study on augmented reality in smartphones. And that work was focusing particularly on how augmented reality might be used in education. And I got a good opportunity there to go and talk to lots of people about the technology and evaluate the technology that was available back then, and kind of wrote all that up in a report. And as part of that kind of outreach and engagement, I got involved with the augmented reality standards community, which is a great kind of collection of people from all different kind of areas that we're trying to contribute to, understanding how augmented reality technologies could all work better together. So if you move on to the next slide, please, Christine. Okay, so as part of this work with the AR Standards Group, we all tried to work out if we could come up with a set of terminology, a kind of glossary of terms, or perhaps a set of different kind of vocabulary for augmented reality, which would kind of help us all understand one another. I guess the kind of question is, what was the thinking behind that? What is the purpose of a glossary, and how does it help? Well, on this slide, I've kind of thrown together kind of a lot of the different logos from the different kind of organizations that are involved in standards work for augmented reality, and particularly in the AR standards community. And, one of the things you really notice about augmented reality is just the very rich and diverse set of organizations and kind of technology representatives that are involved. So, we had a lot of people from kind of web, from 3D modeling and 3D technology standards groups, who are interested in how 3D models would be used in augmented reality. We had people who kind of represented geospatial technology, because one of the main, certainly one of the main ways of anchoring augmented reality content was using geospatial coordinates. We have people on the kind of hardware side who were working on sensor fusion or graphics acceleration or 3D, so the kind of Qualcomms and Cronoses of this world. There were people from kind of wearable hardware technology, a very big input also from computer vision, people like Fraunhofer and PEG4 and all these groups. And then there's this kind of nascent set of new generation web browsers and SDKs from augmented reality, kind of startups like Wikitude and Layer and Uanio as well. And then there's a kind of nascent kind of publishing industry, which is about helping people to get their kind of content, marketing materials, that kind of thing, into this technology set. And it's really clear right from the beginning that everybody is bringing to the discussion their own set of terms and words, which mean a very specific thing for them in their world, in their sphere of influence, but it's really quite misleading for other people who use a word in a completely different way. And I'll try and give a couple of examples of that, but really it was really quite noticeable, especially in this area of augmented reality, which is such a mix of different disciplines, really, that people were trying to discuss something and using words in a very specific way, which has just been completely misunderstood by people, say in computer vision, talking about something which is completely understood in a different way from the geospatial world, and people with that background in GIS. And so if we move on to the next slide. So this gives an example of kind of one of the definitions we tried to, we created as part of our attempts. And I should explain that really this glossary came together not just as a result of one meeting, but as a iteration of several meetings over a course of about 18 months, I think, to 2 years. I think we must have had about 4 or 5 different meetings. And within those meetings, we had a session, 1 or 2 sessions on the glossary. And it's always a very interesting and hotly debated topic. And what was interesting is, at one meeting there might be quite a strong component from one grouping, maybe computer vision, and the terms took on one aspect, and then at the next meeting there might be a stronger representation from people from a different discipline, maybe from hardware or maybe from geospatial, and those same terms were then kind of revisited and reiterated. And so, over a period of time, we started to get more and more precise in our use of language, and also trying to point out that the same term is possibly used in a different way by different groups, by different kinds of people, and accepting that, and just using the glossary as an opportunity to disambiguate for different groups, rather than trying to force a single term on the whole community, but to just say, well, this term is used by geographers in this way, whereas for developers it might be used more in a more kind of general way. So point of interest is a term which is quite important for geospatial based augmented reality, and for geographers, for people coming from, say, a GIS background, or people working with the Open Geospatial Consortium standards group, that's a kind of very loaded and much used coinage, so it's a very kind of specific meaning to them. Whereas for developers who are working with these new generation of browsers like Uanio and Layer, it was used in a much more kind of general way, really to describe the anchoring of data, any kind of data to the real world, even if the link was not geographic in nature. And so, whereas our kind of first iterations of point of interest might have just been kind of copied out of a geospatial textbook, in later iterations we tried to take into account how other people in the community were using the term and try and explain that so that everyone could kind of share vocabulary and understand how other people were using a term. If you just go to the next slide. It's just another quick example, I think. So if we could move on to a next slide. Okay, that's great. So yeah, this is another term, trigger, which by the kind of developer community was just kind of understood in a general sense as a kind of notification, but for people working in computer vision, it had a very much more specific connotation, and the description tries to kind of explain that in some detail. And you also see in the text some underlined links. So one of the really important things was to try and show how all the terms kind of related to one another. And as part of that, we provided links within the document so you could go from one term to another. And we also attempted a visualization, which I think is on the next slide. By the way, all these documents can be seen in the link here. Oh, okay, so actually just before that, I think this is just a screen grab of the kind of version history for the document, and it's really just trying to show the point I was discussing before, that this document and these terms were reiterated over several times, and some terms are added or changed or kind of reworked as different members of the community sort of participated in each meeting. It was a very constructive and interesting way to try and understand the landscape and the general scene. Yeah, so this is just a kind of informal diagram which is trying to show some of the ways that the different terms link to one another. One of three of the key terms are kind of highlighted there. Augmentation, which itself was quite a controversial term because in some places that has a completely different connotation, but was a term we kind of really needed to try and express the relationship between something called a virtual object and a reality object, and the idea that what augmented reality is about is in some way linking the virtual world with the real world and that whole continuum. And then you can kind of start to build up from that some of the linkages between all the different terms that people use. Okay, so I think that's where I was going to kind of stop for this session. Can move on.
Okay. Can everyone see my slides?
Not just yet.
Okay. I definitely have the presentation
But you need to share the application, Greg. You need to go to Quick Start, Share Application.
Okay, I think it's happening now.
Okay. So, okay, thank you. Is this fine? Can you see the slides now?
Yep, that's fine.
Okay, good. My name is Greg Babb. I'm an independent documentation consultant based in Zurich, Switzerland. I'm originally from the U.S., but I've worked in Switzerland for many years. And these days I write and organize technical documentation for clients and consult on document management strategies and publication strategies. My interest in augmented reality comes from my experience writing corrective and preventive maintenance procedures for an air navigation services provider. So this is like the equivalent of the FAA in the United States, and this was a highly regulated environment with a lot of paperwork. I wrote procedures for technicians to follow when intervening on faulty equipment at the airport or when they're just basically doing their daily preventive checks. The documents were written as Word files, and they were always printed out as paper documents. And they were also hard to access, especially when you had to do complex things like follow a 30-step workflow during an upgrade, all the while thumbing through the maintenance document to find step 11. And when I heard about Google Glass and similar products, I realized that augmented reality is a perfect capability for visualizing procedures while working hands-free. So I started a blog on my website, and as I was writing posts about the convergence of technical documentation and augmented reality, I realized I was having difficulty finding the right terms to describe what I was trying to say. So I started searching the internet for AR terminology, and this led me to the AR community website, which I found incredibly useful, and I afterwards contacted Christine about it. Christine asked me to go through the glossaries of both the AR community and the mixed and augmented reality reference model, and to note differences between the two. And that's what this short presentation is about. I also want to say that as an outsider, it's easy to go through someone else's work with a critical eye, but I can definitely see and appreciate all the hard work that went into these glossaries. My hope is that somehow this effort will lead to harmonization of terminology between the two glossaries, and that they will eventually become widely adopted. Okay, so what did I do exactly? I just basically created a document and took all the terms in both glossaries and just put them all together. So you can see on the left side of this PDF file that I have all the terms individually listed, and then in the right two columns, I'm just writing down the definitions, or more specifically, copy-pasting the definitions from the AR glossary and from the MAR reference model. And this allows one to more easily see differences between the two glossaries. I thought it was just the easiest way to make a side-by-side comparison. If anyone wants to have this PDF to refer to and to read, I understand that you can get it from it will be posted after this presentation on the AR community website. So first, some statistics. In the AR glossary, you have 35 terms. The MAR reference model has slightly more. And I found a bunch of terms in both glossaries which were highly similar. Some were highly similar and some were a little bit different. Within the AR glossary itself, there are 2 similar terms. Within the MAR reference model, 6 terms are, I would say, internally similar in terms of to the glossary, and that both glossaries share about 9 terms that are similar but slightly different. And I think as a basis for our work as a glossary task force, this would be pretty much some low-hanging fruit that for us to be able to work on in order to harmonize the terms in both glossaries. Some additional statistics. The majority of terms are actually singular, and I would say that's recommended when you write a glossary. You should try to, as much as possible, to use singular terms. I did find a few plural words in the AR glossary, like animated objects, but I'm sure this is no problem to make them singular. I also found a mixture of US and UK spelling, especially in the AR glossary. And I would say it's recommended that we go with one or the other, but not both. Just as an observation. There were also some issues with inconsistent capitalization. So some of the names of the terms were kind of inconsistently capitalized. You can see their real object. Maybe the object should be, the O should be lowercase. So we can easily go through and put those all in lowercase unless they're proper terms and nouns. And speaking of nouns, the vast majority of terms are nouns, with very few exceptions. So I would say authoring and publishing, those are obviously both verbs, but those are few and far between. And some words could be interpreted as nouns or verbs. So for example, markup and tracking. One interesting feature of the glossary, glossaries that I found, was the combining of multiple terms into one. So for the term, like for example, if you go to the AR Glossary, this is probably not a problem if you're coming in from Google and you're searching over the internet, and then of course you'll instantly get, you'll be able to see the second term, like 6 degrees of freedom pose. But in any situations where these terms are, for example, printed out in a document on paper, and someone's looking for 6 degrees of freedom pose, then they're probably not going to find it because it's under pose, or it's grouped with pose. And the more common convention is to just write I would say, just a separate term for each related term, even though you don't necessarily define it. So you could say, if pose is not the main term, you would nevertheless have an entry, a separate entry under pose, and you could say, make a reference to the other term, which is related. This is some additional similar but different terms, and I'll just briefly go over those. Between the two glossaries, between the AR glossary and the mixed and augmented reality reference model, I found it quite interesting that in the AR glossary there was a term defined called real object marker / anchor. And that term, the definition does refer to marker-based tracking, which one can interpret one might interpret as fiducial. And then, but the word fiducial is really not defined or used in that definition. So it's defined as marker-based, but not fiducial. And in the MAR reference model, it comes right out and says, okay, fiducial target object. But within that definition, it more narrowly defines it as fiducial, with no reference to markerless. Although the reference model itself, it does make several, I would say several references to markerless tracking. So that's kind of maybe another harmonization area that we could look at, is making sure that the definitions between both of them, include terms maybe from the other one. And this could unify a bit these two glossaries. The second example is in the AR glossary. There's a whole list of words used for this term: digital asset, digital object, and virtual object, whereas the reference model just uses the term virtual object. So the AR glossary perhaps is defining a bit more broadly this term, but perhaps again there's some work we could do, just making the glossaries more complete in general, and including some of these other terms like digital object and digital asset. Within the MAR reference model, I also found an interesting term: physical object and a physical object, defined in the same glossary. And I thought this was quite interesting because they're basically, they mean the same thing. It's just that one term does have an indefinite article in front of it, but the definitions were also different. Although they meant the same thing, but the wording was different. It's as if someone had first put in a physical object and then had defined it at another time. Maybe a month later they thought, oh, okay, I'm going to put in physical object. And that also occurred with virtual object and a virtual object. So that would be quite easy to combine. And I think, I mean, I also did some English language editing of that reference model, and it's quite easy to overlook such an error because a physical object was at the top of the list, although it wasn't alphabetized. So they occurred in two separate places in the glossary, and I think that in the MAR reference model, one big help would just be to alphabetize those terms, and then we could catch these kinds of inconsistencies. And another example is the term real-world object capture device, which, although it's a device, it's defined as a sensor. The first word in that definition is sensor. And then later on in the glossary, there is the term sensor or detector, which is further defined. So we could probably hone those terms a bit better. And I'm going to show you some tables later on just to quickly pass through some of the similarities between, or the side-by-side comparison of the two glossaries. But I put in a gray circle to indicate terms, again, which are similar between the two glossaries or within them. Also, there are some terms which are in common use. So, for example, the AR glossary has defined camera view. And I kind of questioned, I mean, please correct me, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, it might be wrong, but my impression was that anyone coming to the glossary who may not be so well versed in AR concepts they might already know what camera view is, and maybe that term doesn't need to be defined explicitly. Within the MAR reference model, as well, a physical object might be, I don't know, we could either get, maybe delete it or keep it in, but then maybe make it more, I don't know, more relevant to AR. But there are those are the only two terms I found in both glossaries, which I would say, they're common kind of English language terms and wouldn't necessarily need a definition. And here are some tables which I had created, which are based on that earlier document I was showing you, the side-by-side comparison document. And in these tables, you can see immediately which terms are appearing in the AR glossary and or in the MAR reference model. Down by Augmented Reality marker, you can see that term is not, the term Augmented Reality marker can be found in the AR glossary, but not in the MAR reference model. However, in the MAR reference model, there is a similar term. So that's why I did not put the red circle by that, but I just wanted to flag it and say this is, a similar term exists in the other glossary. So yeah, so these are the terms B through H, and yeah, I think when we get to work later on, I think we'll be able to use these comparisons as a basis for some of the work that we're doing. You can see that the MAR reference model has a lot of M terms because of the MAR reference, the mixed and augmented reality reference. So a lot of M terms in the MAR reference model. So there should be 37 terms in these tables, and that's basically everything which I've found for as far as differences are concerned in these two glossaries. So that is the end, and I will now pass on. Let's see if I can get this to work. And I'm now passing this on to Tony.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Tony Liao. I'm an assistant professor at Temple University. I recently got my PhD at Cornell University, where I wrote my dissertation about augmented reality issues. Some of that work has been published in New Media and Society, Information Communication Society, and the International Symposium for Mixed and Augmented Reality. My work is primarily interested in how augmented reality, how people are communicating about augmented reality and how that discussion is shaping and pushing technology. Interested in working on the AR Glossary Task Force. So I'll be talking about some of the tasks that we can organize under and some of the things that we'll be wanting to do moving forward, and ways in which we can solicit participation from the community and people who are interested in this topic, and things that we really need to start to work on moving forward. But real quick, I wanted to say again that we're doing this for many, many reasons. But the first and foremost, as a communication issue, that terms matter a great deal. First, as a means of sorting and classification to put things in the proper categories is an important element for growing an industry and making those things absolutely clear, or as clear as we can. More importantly, it's to of mutual understanding and communication. As Ben mentioned, there are a variety of stakeholders from a variety of different industries coming at augmented reality because it is a convergence of all of these technologies that, when they're put into conversation with each other, it's important that they understand where there might be issues or gaps, because when we're in these meetings together and we're having these discussions, those clarifications can happen. But in the event where that level of physical communication isn't possible, there should be some way to at least bridge or make clear to prevent any misunderstandings from happening. The third reason, I think, is that these terms present the industry in a particular way and shape public perception, starting from augmented reality broadly as a term that people in the public use to understand some of the work that we do, but on down throughout each of these terms and the ways in which we refer to the technology eventually, becomes how people understand what it is that's possible and what we can do with the technology. And then within internal to the industry, the level of coordination, if you look at Greg's excellent comparison between these two reference models, are people within the AR industry that are not necessarily speaking the same language, or these documents are talking past one another, or at least over one another, and elements of the level of coordination not where they need to be, and people coming from different disciplines or different industries aren't necessarily understanding the work that could be relevant to them, or the work that other sectors are doing. So sharing that expertise across. groups. And then finally, the political perception of augmented reality is similarly related to the public perception, but as an organization or as a group that is advocating for augmented reality more generally, these words and these terms are things that we can rally behind and unify and really push the community forward. Just a couple examples of that last point in particular. You can look at U.S. politics to see that these terms are really important as far as how we as industry members utilize them. And these are examples from politics, of course, but just the change in one term when they survey participants finds that 46% of the U.S. public opposes Obamacare when you call it that, and much fewer people call it the Affordable Care Act. And so these types of naming conventions that industries and groups and advocacy groups agree upon and standardize ultimately has this kind of effect. And politics understands this to rename things like tax cuts, tax relief, and calling laws things like economic growth and tax relief. Other instances comes from a colleague of mine, Professor John Schultz, who says that there are certain political groups that are less persuaded by this phenomenon if you call it global warming rather than climate change. And so all of these demonstrate instances not just in which the terms are useful for internal coordination, but rather that the coordination behind the terms and the things that we use them to refer to ultimately have broader implications and larger issues as far as pushing the technology forward. And so I think if we use this group as a guide and a resource, in order to make it such, we'll need people to participate in a variety of capacities moving forward. And we need to come together to decide this because ultimately these terms are ones that we will use that will be important to recognize how each individual or each community prevent confusion. What we can do is be a place where these discussions can happen outside of any individual company, outside of any individual industry community, because we need this more than most industries because we bring in so many different types of people with various types of expertise and various types of understanding of augmented reality. And so Greg's point as to things that we can or cannot take out or things that we need to define and the level of granularity with which we need to define are all important questions that we as a glossary group can be the place where that discussion happens and welcome people from all spectrums of expertise or understanding of augmented reality, because each of those people will be important to making those kinds of determinations. And so if we think about tasks that people can help with, well, I'll isolate it down to 3 in particular at this point in time. The first is cataloging. The second is reconciling. And the third is enforcing. I'll talk a little bit more about what each one of those means. So cataloging, we can understand as taking the many, many documents that already exist out there. And Greg did an excellent example of this, right? Cataloging the individual differences between the AR reference model and glossary, cataloging the difference in terms, the similarity in terms, cataloging differences in writing conventions, differences in instances where they refer to the same thing using multiple different kinds of terminologies. There are many more official documents within individual companies, people publishing books that contain glossaries and definitions, people publishing informal uses of these terms and words that simply need to be cataloged in order to understand how it is that people are choosing to refer to these issues. And at the first moment is to understand where and when and how these uses differ, how they're similar, places of redundancy, etc. And we've already cataloged a few documents on a spreadsheet where we simply take the literal definitions that they themselves provide and look at the difference. And we're already seeing a number of areas that contain gaps that can further inform our definitions. And this is the kind of cataloging, sort of scoping out definitions, scoping out documents in the world that sort of provides this group with the baseline for the types of tasks that we will continue to do and sort of see what's out there in the world. Which leads us to this kind of second task of reconciling. Right? After we scope that out, after we see official types of definition, and we're finding not a lot of overlap in the actual use of terms, or perhaps dictionary overlap in terms, but difference in how the terms get used in the documents themselves. There could be, when we start to see differences between dictionary definitions versus the contextual usage of the definitions, or differences in definitions across industries, across stakeholder groups, as Ben talked about. Also, differences between the official definition versus the colloquial usage of them, right? Such that certain people might, mean augmented reality marker, but simply drop the augmented reality and refer to just marker or other types of terms where there are different colloquial uses that sometimes bleed over into our writing, understanding those as well. And so this particular task would be which we as a group would start to make determinations about the advantages and disadvantages of certain definitions, places where we could collapse, places where we would want to make them broad or narrow, or create some sort of standards as far as the overlap, or in instances where we feel that multiple definitions might be appropriate at different times, at least acknowledging the presence of those and acknowledging the ways in which they're used in multiple different ways. And so this might look a lot more like Ben's chart, the flow chart of terms that are linked, and then within that we could start to reconcile and collapse and combine and make determinations about the relative strengths and weaknesses of certain types of definitions for what it is that we're trying to do as an industry. The last task that I think we will need with this group after we are able to start with some sort of agreement or come to some sort of agreement about the use of a variety of terms is to then start taking actions to try to standardize and enforce the use of those terms within the community, to the extent that we think that terms are only valuable as far as people understand and use them. This will be an important part of the glossary group after we create a baseline for the important and the critical core concepts that we think should be standardized. And so in many instances of people writing about AR, both official and unofficial and sometimes journalistic, the improper usage of terms and references get made, often not intentionally, just because of a lack of knowledge, which Greg referred to when he described his experience entering this community, that there's not necessarily that place, or there's so many different terms that oftentimes it's maybe the first place that you go that you find how you will end up referring to it. And So one task that we think we could potentially engage in would be to proactively work to prevent those errors and serve as a guide. One way we might think about this would be to edit and maintain a Wikipedia page of glossary terms related to augmented reality that reflects the work of the glossary, which would then serve as a guide that might prevent these kinds of improper usages and errors amongst people within the community as well as people coming to the community. And then eventually the other might be to potentially find those and retroactively change those errors. So not just using the guide as, not just using the glossary as a preventative guide, but potentially to contact groups and authors to make them aware of these types of usage. In academia, this happens quite frequently, where when we publish a particular thing, oftentimes or sometimes we'll get a message from someone else that says, you know, this particular term, this particular thing, you referred to in a way that is not appropriate, or you referred to in a way that you know, you could use this alternate term instead, which just makes us more conscientious the next time we write about a particular term. Say stigma, for example, is one that if you write about stigma, oftentimes there'll be someone that will contact you and you know, suggest a change in how you refer to that particular concept. And so that could be another level with which the glossary group takes the step to identify, reconcile, and then find the places in which people are utilizing terms in a way that's not wholly consistent with what it is that we have defined them, and then letting them know such that they're aware moving forward as they write about augmented reality. So these are the three tasks that we are soliciting participation for in this task force. Each of them, I think, would be of interest to different people and different levels of expertise. But again, all of these are issues that don't require necessarily expertise, simply a desire to help with creating a standard for talking about augmented reality, because these terms are really important, and these are the terms that we use to organize and guide our actions moving forward. So I'll stop there and take questions if there are any.
Great summary, Tony. Thank you very much, and want to thank all three of you for your excellent descriptions of the situation, the history, our current status, and what we might do going forward. So there have been some questions, and I organized them a little differently. Some of them, I think, were questions that, Tony, you answered quite well in terms of next steps, what the workflow for the task force could be to make changes to glossaries, and how others have done this before. But one of the things that you didn't make very clear, Tony, but I think is worthy of discussion, is if the Glossary Task Force, or a Glossary Task Force focusing on augmented reality, should propose its own terms, or should it rely on others, developers or others, to propose the terms and the definitions? So how do we, how does that normally happen in other groups, I guess is the question here. Does anybody have any opinions on that or any experience? Tony?
Well, Christine, my experience is mainly writing for private companies, and what we normally did was we did rely on kind of open source definitions that we found, perhaps on the internet. So maybe it's a little bit of a different angle. But as an open work group, yeah, that's a very good question. I mean, I would just off the top of my head propose that that we be somewhat proactive in defining some of these terms ourselves. And I think my belief is that others tend to respond perhaps faster or in a better way when there's already some proposal that they can just correct or they can give feedback on, so something concrete.
Great. Thank you, Greg. Any other comments on this topic of who should propose or who should define terms?
So my sense of that is that it reflects the multiple goals that we have for our glossary, right? As far as internal to industries or across industries, it seems that the best and easiest approach is to take terminology that is already being used iteratively and contextually in those industries and sort of reshape them, because those are how they refer to important concepts. Perhaps as also a goal to change public perception or introduce terms into the lexicon, it might be easier in that sense if we feel that certain types of language or certain genres of technical language may not be appropriate for that, and we would need new terms to transcend that communication bridge to a different type of audience. So I think both of those could be within the purview of the glossary group. It depends in that instance on the goal of a particular term and then a goal for the definition more broadly.
Okay. It's very interesting that you speak in this edition, we have sometimes referred to something we call the glossary as if there's one, and yet we are already aware and people are using different glossaries with different definitions. And sometimes we have some questions is, how do we go about harmonizing different glossaries? And do different glossaries, does that mean harmonization or agreement? Does that mean that the different glossaries have the exact same definitions in them? Is there any feeling about that in terms of this being, how far do we need to go as far as a task force, and what's the best for the future of augmented reality and its adoption?
Yeah, okay, so my own feeling on that is that with augmented reality, because there is such a cross-section of disciplines, some of them sharing terms in quite an established way, that it is probably going to be impossible to fully harmonize. Looking at kind of Greg's work, I think there is a lot of scope for kind of harmonizing between the two documents he looked at. And in general, people are generally talking about the same thing. But I think the approach we eventually took from the community of accepting some differences and just explaining, who uses this term in this way is probably quite useful, because part of it is trying to understand what it is that you're trying to understand where people from different disciplines are sort of using a term in a very different way from the one that you're used to, and in a sense that's quite a useful thing in itself.
Good, thank you, Ben. Any other comments or suggestions on how to whether a perfect harmonization is a goal and how to accommodate different perspectives?
Yeah, so I think I agree with Ben in that regard. If you take a look at some of the glossary definitions from his slides that the community had previously agreed upon, you can see instances where there's an acknowledgement that says, computer vision refers to this word as this, or this concept in the browser SDK community means something different as far as what a feature is. And that reflects, the the way in which our definitions can sort of bring all of that together, where the important element of that is to let people who are from other perspectives within the AR community see and make note of the difference to understand when that happens, perhaps in a different area that they're not familiar with or may not be their area of expertise.
Mm-hmm. Well, this sounds like there's a lot of nuance and a lot of contextually using terms, mapping terms to each other, as we saw the way Ben showed it, is helping people understand how to use terms. I also think, Tony, something you brought up at the end about reconciling, this is what we're talking about, right, is reconciliation, and to what degree, it's very subtle, it's an aspiration, but to what degree should it be harmonized, or how much diversity is appropriate. But I think the last part was around the enforcement, where, of course, sometime we're a ways out from that. One of the ways, perhaps, of helping enforcement is to have a place on the web, whether it's Wikipedia or a website or a wiki, some kind that represents agreement and represents the work of this Glossary Task Force. Do you think that it's appropriate for this task force to have its own resources and a website and a wiki, perhaps publishing under a a legal copyright, something a little stiffer, so that when enforcing it, you have something to send people to to educate them and to be consistent? Does anybody have any opinions on that or suggestions? Okay.
Well, no, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was going to say that it's worth thinking about how terms that are currently within the community of developers and 3D experts, computer vision experts, academics, people who write standards and use standards, how these terms eventually will evolve into or migrate into kind of common parlance, into popular culture, and it'd be helpful, if at all possible, to try and understand how that happens. Where do terms like cloud computing come from? Who are the the people? Is it media? Is it people who write influential books? Is it people representing large corporate companies? Because in a way these terms start getting used in a way which is kind of alien to the people kind of implementing the technology, if you like, or working with the technology, but then become kind of an inevitable set of terms that we all kind of have to kind of work around. And so I guess in terms of a kind of shared resource, it's trying to understand where people writing, where these kind of influential people who are going to kind of create a more kind of common vocabulary are going to be looking to try and understand the technical world for themselves, and then hopefully pick up on some good practice rather than just coming up with kind of random words which nobody really understands.
So I think what you're saying is that even though we're in an era where things are often crowdsourced and people migrate to agreements using social media and so forth, what I'm hearing you say, Ben, is that there's still a place for an authoritative definition, and having something that's published perhaps under the auspices of a standards body, for example, a paper of some kind, would have longevity and would be able to contribute to to not only enforcement but education.
Yeah, that's right. You know, so if you're a kind of influential public speaker and you've been asked to talk on the topic of augmented reality in some context, and you kind of want to brief yourself on the area, you know, it's what resources
Where do you
are
go?
going to be. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, this has been very valuable, and we think we've answered the questions that the participants had for us. Thank you very much for your time. Also, thank once again the IEEE for hosting this special virtual meeting. The archive will be available, as will the presentations and the document provided by Greg. Thank you very much, and have a good day. Bye-bye.